Well,
Mary,
this
of
puts
course,
you in a fairly unique position because I haven't met anybody else who has a memory of the spirit world.
yeah.
What's it like?
Well, it depends where you are in the spirit world as to what it is like. A lot of people from Earth arrive in the spirit world in quite a dark condition, and when I say dark condition, what I'm doing is referring to their condition of love. So in other words, in the spirit world, it's your condition of love that determines where you arrive and how you generally progress thereafter. And so if a person has a poor condition of love on Earth, where they've used their will on Earth to attack others, to harm others, and to cause harm to the environment and so forth, then what happens is that when they pass, they're in a fairly poor condition of love, and their environment in the spirit world matches their condition.
I guess when it comes to this topic, I agree in some senses, because I think love is important, and a person's ability to understand others, it does change how your mental state is, but I don't see it as being something on a sort of spiritual plane. I see it as being something on a psychological plane. If you don't have the ability to love others, your soul belongs inside an animal body, because that is how animals think and see others. They don't have that ability to love or show compassion, and the more hate and the smaller your ability is to love, the smaller or more dangerous animal you need to be in. And therefore, as your ability to love increases, your ability to get inside of more intelligent animals becomes increased. When you become human, a similar thing applies, only this time you're going to be getting into the kids of parents who are more loving. So if you are a more loving person, when you die and come back to life, you will get more loving parents in your next life. But souls always start off from a sort of low vibration or low ability to love, and their ability to love grows over time. So if you have parents that are not very loving, it probably means that you were either an animal in your past life, or you were just an unloving person, hence why you have been given this family. Although I'd have to also point out that there might be some exceptions, such as if it's your role in life to reduce the population, then you might be given shitty parents, or parents who are kind of cruel to you, because it's supposed to bring out some sort of anger in you to make you want to reduce the population. So I feel like there might be a little hidden catch there. My parents are not loving in any way. Maybe that's done deliberately to make me not like humans, to want to birth a new species of human, a new type of human. I'm going to call them sprites. But I think my past life is also a reason why I've got the parents that I've got now. But I believe that I was a cave woman living with Neanderthals, so that would be why I was unloving in my past life. I know social services hate the idea of child abuse and stuff, and it's true that it's really bad. But the good thing about being abused by your parents is that you might actually find yourself learning to love, or learning to change, or suffering to the point where you don't want to be like your parents, and you will learn to become more loving, more caring, more considerate. You would be more understanding to other people who are suffering, or maybe you'll just be more fed up and realize that this world is full of idiots and that we need to get rid of these idiots. And because of this, you grow and you will become a better person. Now, when you die, you will get better parents in your next life, because the Matrix will do another reevaluation of your current life, a life that was probably very different to your past life, and hence it will give you parents that are most similar to you, how you were in your more recent life. I know social services hate the idea of, children going through abuse, but I feel like they need to recognize that actually children who have bad parents were probably bad parents in their past life, and this is sort of a bad karma that they're receiving for being a fairly bad parent. I think my sister was a princess or queen in her past life, but I also think she had lots of kids and hardly spent any time around them. She just passed them on to her servants. So her getting a bad mother in this life is kind of karma for what she did to her kids in her past life. So you shouldn't start victimizing people that have bad parents, because they probably did that same thing to their kids in their past life, so now they're just sort of feeling the karma from it. Okay, if you're a cave woman in your past life, that would be why you were a bad parent. Or if you just were very, very poor but still wanted kids, that could be why you can't provide for your kids, and they might go through loads of suffering because of it. But what you don't realize is that you doing that might mean that in the future you're going to be one of these poor kids who have very poor mothers who can't look after them, hence the baby just dies. If you are living in poverty and you can't raise a kid, and you can't guarantee that it makes it to the age of 4 or something because you don't have the breast milk or the money to buy breast milk, if you're in that position and you still choose to have a kid and not get an abortion, there's a very high chance that when you die you might find yourself being that kid from someone else. Why should God care about your kids if you don't care about your kids? You know, I know some of these people are so poor that they can't even afford to get an abortion, and I know some religious nutcases are, you know, saying that God is against this, but they're inverted, they're backwards, they're causing all these problems. If the governments can stop this and actually start funding abortions, you know, this would be what needs to happen, and I don't know why you're doing it. I think everyone's just going against God, which is part of the sin nature, to do the opposite of what God wants. It's the cruel nature of life, but it's called karma. But you can get out of this karma by learning to love, by learning to actually care about things that are suffering around you. And also you have to be smart enough to recognize what suffering is, to recognize that a fetus is actually just a body without a soul, and it only becomes a body with a soul near the time of its birth. You know, you're not killing a child if you get an abortion, but if you are not connected to the Spirit, if you're not connected to my truth and the things that I believe and the things that I say, you know, you will not know the truth, hence you will not have the truth, hence you will not preach the truth or promote the truth. Although I do feel like someone like Donald Trump might not know this deliberately because it's part of the test, you know, telling people lies to see what they believe. And when Anna comes saying this truth, you know, are you going to believe this, or are you just going to think Anna's a monster for supporting and funding abortions, which is what I hope to do soon. But over time you will learn to love, and you will feel that this is the truth. For everyone dies, but would God really create something, a timeline where everyone dies? No. God will create a timeline where, yes, you have the physical death, but then you come back and you have another chance. You know, that is real love. Well, as close as you can get to it anyway. And also, if you think about it, to think that you'll go 9 months with there being a soul inside your belly. I mean, how awful would that be if you were that soul? To live in some sort of prison for 9 months where you can't breathe properly, you can't think properly. You know, I'm thinking about it, you know, how would it be to be a soul inside a belly? And I would feel sick if that was the truth. That's not the truth, because that would be like imprisoning a soul for 9 months, which is not love. That is not love. That is not kindness. That is not nice. I'm thinking about when my sister was pregnant, you know, I didn't feel any kind of motivation to touch her belly unless it was to feel the baby kick. But I felt like I couldn't sense anything about the soul because I didn't sense there was a soul in there. Now, if you don't believe me, well, that's up to you. But maybe God is so loving that he will imprison souls for 9 months inside a belly when they can't even breathe, move, think. I mean, that just sounds like a freaking nightmare to me. If that doesn't sound like a nightmare to you, then I don't know what you're thinking about. But going back to the topic on bad parents, by having a bad parent, you would actually know, you know, how bad it is to have bad parents, and it'll probably teach you to be a lot more independent, you know, to rely on yourself, to count on yourself, to grow faster, to be smarter faster, because you need to look after yourself and you need to protect yourself. So I'm aware that I had bad parents, and a lot of people might call this abuse, but I learned to look after myself, and I felt I couldn't judge my parents. Why? Because they are just stupid and they are doing their best. They're just not bright enough to know what that really is. But should I judge them for that? No. But what I was aware of is that there is a lot of stupid people here. And when I recognized that I was not like them, it kind of made me believe in reincarnation, because it was like, how can I come from this when I'm so much smarter than her, even when I was like 6? It was from the age of 6 that I realized this and stopped calling them mum and dad, but rather started calling them by their first names. But in a similar way, you can think about monkeys and how, you know, the mum swings around in trees with some sort of baby hugging onto them. I mean, that to me seems incredibly dangerous, but the babies learn to, you know, wake up faster and to learn to look after themselves faster, and it's not always a bad thing. I don't like how social services are being ultra protective, ultra picky on things, because, you know, as long as the child survives and, you know, isn't missing feeds and stuff, you know, that's spending hours of time with sick all over them or something, you know. There's standards, but they don't have to be as high as I think social services want them to be. I think they recognise that Sophie was a bad mum, and they just assumed that because I'm her sister, or my mum is also quite mad, but, you know, anyone around her, her new partner of her new kid, you know, I think that they assume because Sophie's bad that, you know, everyone else needs help too, and everyone else can't be trusted, and that is them being too picky. I think they need to recognise that when it comes to bad parents, sometimes the Matrix joins these parents because they recognise similarities, and their job should just be to make sure that the child isn't suffering more than it needs to, and therefore they shouldn't see the child as being theirs if it's clear that there's nothing wrong with other family members around who, you know, want to take on the responsibility. I think if social services would have just given me some sort of certificate to say that Sophie can't run off with the child, you know, that I have the authority, that's all I needed. And instead they've ended up spending like £200,000 £10,000 on trying to raise this child and doing all these unnecessary meetings, giving my sister false hope that she's going to get the child back each month, and of course she never does because she just doesn't have it in her to do what is needed to do. The Matrix joined these two because the Matrix saw similarities between the souls. Although I think in Sophie's case, the soul was only joined because the soul is the father. Hence, of course, that soul would be the soul that's most similar to one of the parents, because he is one of the parents. So social services shouldn't see children with bad parents as being their children, unless, of course, the mother and father agree that they can't do it and pass the child on, which I think is the more typical case. You know, there's plenty of fish in the sea, but a lot of fish don't actually raise their kids. So I'm sure there are a lot of people that do adopt kids or pass them on because they can't manage and they don't want to be responsible for looking after a crying kid. But for my religion, I want to promote that you shouldn't have kids if you can't raise them. Molesting children is disgusting, but if you knew that these people who have molested children actually are just going to die and be the next victims of child abuse and molestation, you know, this is bad and we need to put a stop to it. But it would make you feel less bad about potential risks. You know, if you're someone who's not molesting your kid, but you're being accused of doing this, you know, it's a horrible, horrible thing, and you can't put people through trauma and accuse them of doing things that they're not doing just because of the potential risks that maybe they are. You know, maybe the person who made that report just doesn't like them for some reason and is trying to stir up trouble, trying to stir up the pot just to hurt them. You know, there's a lot of nasty people in this world, so social services shouldn't take every report or claim seriously because there are a lot of horrible people that do horrible things. But lying is actually one of the things that are far more likely to happen than just molestation. You know, it's easy to lie, but it's not actually easy to abuse your kids if you're a smart person, because it will make you feel guilty about what you're doing. But if you can stop it, and if you know it's happening, then do stop it. But what I'm saying is don't destroy families' lives by accusing everyone you meet of being a pedophile or being one of these people. I think in the future, if people knew about reincarnation, they wouldn't do this stuff in fear of what might come back on them, and therefore social services don't need to act like every person they meet could be a predator. And that would be better for all families, because they won't have to feel like their children are going to be taken off them for tiny little mistakes. I felt in a way that that's how Marco felt, like even though he was a really good dad and doing everything right, that he had to stick by their laws just because he didn't want the child to be taken. So things like leaving the child with me should have been something that was completely fine, but because he was worrying about them, he had to do things their way, even though it was actually just making things a lot more complicated because he works one day and that was the day he had decided to work. And I feel like social services were kind of accusing me of being just like Sophie, even though I'm nothing like her, and they shouldn't have done that. You know, they're watching over Sophie because she's done things wrong, and by saying that I can't look after the child either, it's almost like you're saying that I've done something wrong when I haven't, and I didn't like feeling that way. And I felt like they didn't care. They didn't care how I felt, and they felt that way because they themselves don't have that compassion towards others. I understand feelings can be wrong, but these are the sort of feelings you feel when people say that you can't look after a child even though they know nothing about you. And well, because part of this report was that I failed the last test, even though it wasn't a proper test, it was just one person coming to my house and talking to me for an hour. But because I'm also God, you know, it also felt personal because it felt like these people just don't give a shit about all the videos that I'm making and everything that I'm doing. So, you know, it's emotional, and it's not a good thing. When you start hurting people, you know, other people might be more emotional. They might start thinking about all the different possibilities, and if you're someone who doesn't tap into these emotions or these possible things of how other people are feeling, then you're not going to care, you know, how they're really affecting the family. They're just trying to focus on the child, that they're not really thinking about how other people are feeling by being treated like they too are bad parents. And I think they're also unaware of how angry people get over their kids if they have, you know, compassion for them. And maybe they feel that way because they don't have that much compassion towards their child. So they can't understand how someone else would have this, you know, passion or emotion. They might just see it as like a mental illness or something. Maybe they're just the type of people that do just follow orders, and they can't understand why someone doesn't want to just follow orders. Having bad parents, though, can be a good thing because it can make people change. But then there's also the other type that say or think, my parents were unloving to me, so I'm going to be unloving to my kids. You know, sometimes there's people that do that. Instead of thinking I'm going to be different from my parents, they think that I'm just going to copy my parents. So there's two types of people, ones that sort of evolve and develop fast, and some that just don't. It takes a very long time.
And so for the majority of people who pass, they pass into what's called the first sphere, or the first dimension of the spirit world.
My translation of that is, this is their first life.
And the first dimension ranges from very, very terrible conditions, which match what Dante's description of hell, for example.
in their first life they have a very low vibration of love or ability to think properly and rationally or emotionally.
And even worse than that, complete darkness, desolation, no love.
So if you think about all the shanty towns where people or girls are forced to do horrible things, you know, this is like the hell level that he's talking about. A real place on earth where poverty is just really terrible and people just don't give a shit.
Right the way through to what's called the top of the first sphere, which is a location called Summerland, which is where many children arrive. And that could be likened to a place that's the most beautiful place you can imagine here on Earth.
In my translation, this is like Hampstead or Beverly Hills, or just a really nice place to live on Earth, full of nice houses, nice people, friendly vibe, friendly attitude, and just full of positivity. Souls that have learnt to channel good positive energies are going to find themselves being given more positive parents that are similar to them. Okay, it's true that not all people living in Beverly Hills or in Hampstead are, you know, nice, sane people. You know, my mum's batty as hell, but she has a shitty flat and she's a hoarder. So, but yeah, I do like nice areas. And I think when I was a cave woman living in Jerusalem, you know, I liked gardens and I would have been attracted to nice areas. So that could be why I was born in Hampstead, because that's the type of person or thing that I'm attracted to, and they were attracted to Hampstead too. I think I was born in England because it's like an island that's cut off from most places, and well, I was going to live a life of isolation and feeling cut off, so it's a good place to live, you know, considering how bad the world is.
So that's the first dimension. The different levels of the first dimension range between those particular conditions. And the average person on Earth passes into one location in the first dimension in the spirit world.
And that's dependent upon what?
Primarily,
their
as I said, their development in love. So how much they understand love and practice it in their day-to-day life. It's got nothing to do with religious background, racial background, gender background. Nothing to do with what kind of life you led in terms of what society believed about you or felt about you.
Actually, I'd say it does depend on how you lived your life in a past life. But technically, if you were an animal, then how you lived your life would actually be dependent on your DNA and the things that you learned through the teachings of your DNA or of your bad parents who are animals. And, you know, how many animals, what kind of variety, were you a bear, were you a snake, were you a parrot, were you a cow? And if you have to have 100 lives being an animal first, you know, which combination, what kind of combination did you have? You know, there's a lot of people that are very good at looking after kids, and even if they're living their first life, I feel it's really important to say that even if you are living your first life, you know, you are capable of feeling love. If you don't feel love, it's probably because of either your experiences or your past life experiences and certain angers or mistreatment that you might be feeling resentment from, or the fact that you're not evolved. But if you do feel love, that doesn't mean that you aren't living your first life as a human. There are many reasons why a soul might feel love even if they're living in their first human life. This could have happened because maybe you were an abused dog in your past life and you've learnt to feel love through this. You know, just because you might be living your first life as a human, that doesn't mean that you don't have love or the ability to love, because dogs do have the ability to love. A lot of animals do have this ability. It's just the Matrix trying to get a variety of different souls, working out which combinations go best, but the soul's choice does imply too. I did do this hike and there was a bunch of cows and they were all being very, very protective over this one cow, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on. And then I saw that one cow had a baby and they were actually all just being really protective over the baby, and I thought that was really cute. It was very human quality even though these were just cows. It did make me think of Leo and all the social workers that are gathering around this kid to protect the kid. But at the same time, it also felt like the cows were scared of me and they were protecting the baby from me, so I didn't really like that feeling. You get the good or the bad. That's just how it is.
It's got everything to do with what in reality is love from God's perspective. It's God that set up the universal system, and so therefore it's God's laws that are enacted, not man's. And so quite often people feel that they're in a good condition of love, but when they pass into the spirit world, they soon come to terms with the fact, for many, they soon come to terms with the fact that they're not in as good condition of love as what they believed. There are very few people who pass into the second sphere in the spirit world, or the second dimension.
Yeah, I think you're full of lies. So your condition isn't as good as you think it is. You know, you're just telling people stuff. I mean, I'm glad you're saying it because it's inspiring me to say something, you know, what you're talking about. I'm trying to listen to you and explain what you're talking about. But yeah, it's strange how you don't know what you're talking about. You know, to say that people can't make it into the second heaven or hemisphere, as you called it, and then to think that, you know, they're the ones that aren't loving, but you are the ones that are loving. I feel like you're just being inverted because you can't see your own condition. You're talking about yourself. Let me give you the information. I believe that you are in your fourth sphere, or should I say fourth life of condition. And I think that 4 is actually the average number of lives that people on Earth have had. That is correct. I believe that all or most of the 8 billion people in the world have had at least 4 lives. But I also think that there are some new souls that are having their first life just now. These are going to be the people who are less spiritually connected, hence they're more likely to be people that I meet because they're not going to be so affected by the spirit that is affecting me. Just because I've had a vision of someone's life, that doesn't mean that they haven't had a lot more. Although I do want to stress that that might not actually be the truth. You know, when humans were first evolving, there would have been quite a few thousand years of evolving. You know, I believe that Dala came 23,000 years ago, so that's quite a long time ago. But the Jewish calendar is only supposed to be 6,000 years old, so where did this number come from? You know, so maybe the countdown of people's lives only actually started around 6,000 years ago. So when I say that the average angel has had 10 lives, maybe it's only saying 10 lives from this point onwards, from 6,000 BC onwards. And therefore there might be a case of me not actually counting the lives properly, and perhaps people had more lives before that, only I wasn't attached to them. Maybe I consider any sort of Homo sapien life that was alive before 6,000 years ago, you know, maybe I considered that to not be actually human. Like maybe I just saw them as like animals, hence didn't count them, but was instead just assessing them to see which characters would pick up on different energies or what direction they'll go. You know, that could be like an audition type of phase. Hence, that's not part of the 4 lives that people have, or the 10 or 20 lives in other people's cases. I say this mostly just because a part of me feels like that might be the truth, but I don't know. I just need to say it. But I do feel like this 6,000 BC calendar, you know, hasn't come out of nowhere. The Jewish dates were set up for a reason, and maybe this is the reason why, because I've only been counting lives as lives from that date. In fact, because it's the Jewish calendar, that could actually suggest that it was only from this date, 5,784 years ago, that souls were starting to wake up to the fact that, you know, there was some sort of God or presence around. You know, I don't know the full truth, but it might be complicated if I start saying that you've had 4 lives that are good and recognizable, but you also had a couple of lives before that that I, you know, have known. It's easier just to say what I'm saying, basically.
And historically, there's only been a few people that have ever passed into the 3rd dimension of the spirit world.
Can you give some examples?
Gandhi passed into the 3rd sphere of the spirit world, into the 3rd dimension, directly.
If that's true, that means that you probably have a better connection than he does, because you are on your 4th life and Gandhi was probably on his 3rd life, and I think that could actually be the truth.
There were historically some of the people who you would like, who, well, they're mostly unknowns, people that you wouldn't, that the average person wouldn't know, because they've lived very mundane lives on Earth and lived very normal, what would be classified as normal lives on Earth.
That's probably true. I mean, if the average person has lived 4 lives, because that's what you are like, you know, you represent the average person, so if you have lived 4 lives, then others have. But yeah, I feel like you've kind of changed things a little bit to make yourself seem more special, which is something that the average person likes to do. And some of the souls have only lived 3 lives. That probably means that they're less significant than the average person, or less clued on, or perhaps just a little bit behind in their education and stuff. They don't have the best of jobs, basically. I don't really know much about Gandhi, but I didn't really agree with his fashion sense, and he's not really that connected to me, so yeah, he probably has had 3 lives. But people are a bit inverted, so they would look up to him as someone who's wise. Why? Because he came like a long time ago, and for some reason people seem to value things of the past more than the things of the future.
Often it's the people who've lived famous lives on Earth who pass into the 1st condition in into the 1st sphere in quite a poor condition.
That is definitely not the truth, because the famous people are actually the people that are helping me the most. They're the ones that are most connected to me. But yeah, there is going to be a time of confusion where these people are, well, they're going to say different things. Some are probably going to support the idea of some sort of fake rapture of me. Maybe by this point people will sort of change their mind on things. Maybe people would realize that you are lying here or making mistakes, and maybe you yourself will turn to support these people. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of people that might hate these people because they don't want to believe that they are better than them. So by you saying this, it's almost like you're implying that they can be better. I like the portal idea, but if you want to come up with something different, then that's your choice. I know you promote the idea of oneness with God and, you know, feeling God's love and stuff, but yeah, a lot of people think that love and sex are the same thing, so there could be a connection there. You know, maybe you could be saying that you have to get in there by loving me like a cute rabbit, or maybe you could be saying that you should have nothing to do with Anna because she's just like a trickster or a lie, a deceiver, Lilith that's not telling the truth. But yeah, if they don't see you as Jesus or Christ, they're going to just do the opposite of what you say. But I think in my case, if I do show them that I'm Christ, and if they do believe, they are more likely to do the opposite of what I say, to try and prove that I'm not controlling them, or I'm not like influencing them in any way. You know, they could be like, you know, you don't have any power over me, so I'm going to do this over you to prove that I have no power over you. But really, it's kind of like inverted psychology. For the truth is, as long as it's not actually happening, I don't care what people do. I have no preference. I want them to express their anger, their hatred on me, so that I know how I should treat them. And that is I, as in God.
Because they had a lot of addictions in play, many of them, and also had a lot of intentions that weren't based on love. So
the afterlife is, as you see it, it's like people who pass into the hells, as you call it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a position of permanency, of forever torment, but that's a transitional period, and every soul has the chance to progress. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. So every soul, every person, no matter where they are, whether they're here on earth or in the spirit world, have the chance to progress out of their condition. And the amount of desire they have to do that, or what I would classify as the exercise of their free will, you know, how much they want to do it, will determine on how fast they move from one dimension to the next. Unfortunately, on earth here, there are a lot of impediments, social impediments, to progressing beyond a certain condition, because the more your condition of love is out of harmony with the world's condition, the more generally you're attacked. And this is why the majority of people on earth finish up staying in a certain condition until they pass, because there is this general weight of the world which prevents the person from growing in further conditions of love without, because of their own fear of being attacked, sort of causes them to stagnate, if you like. And so there's many people on earth with good intentions, and I'd say there's billions of people on earth with good intentions, but unfortunately our unhealed emotions cause us to be very afraid of different things, and particularly afraid of violence and attack. And since we're afraid of the violence and attack, we then have a tendency to stagnate in our development to a certain point of love.
Let me stop you there. No, I don't agree that fear of being attacked is what is preventing people from changing. No, I think it's stubbornness and people believing that they have truth, that they are the truth, you know, that they are the ones that know who they are and what they want and what's right. You know, they believe that they know who God is and what God feels and what God wants and who God is. People who believe that abortion are wrong, you know, they're not going to change and see the truth that actually it's quite a horrible thing to imagine there's like a soul inside your stomach stuck there for 9 months. I mean, that's quite a horrible thing, but people who don't believe that are going to say, no, it's killing, you can't kill, you know, that they're just going to stay in their own mindset and they're not going to progress or move because they don't want to. They're stubborn, and they're also heartless to knowing how awful it is to have to grow up being adopted or in foster care because they've got parents that had them at a wrong time when they couldn't afford them or didn't want them, or maybe they were raped, or maybe they were just too young. You know, they don't understand suffering and the suffering that overpopulation can cause because of poverty and people not having the intelligence to be able to create jobs and businesses and stuff like this. They don't have the truth, but they think they do have the truth. And they can't change because they don't want to change. It's got nothing to do with fear of being attacked. Although it is true that many people have a wrong or inverted sense of wrong and right, hence they don't want to change to the opposite of you, maybe perhaps because other people around them are inverted and are brainwashing them into believing lies.
Once we go beyond that point, there's a higher likelihood of us being attacked or being treated violently. And as a result of that, we have a tendency to stay at a certain point where we've grown to a certain point of love, but don't have the courage to make the next step into a greater condition of love. And that's what is the biggest impediment here on earth, the general projection of the environment towards an individual who attempts to grow beyond the condition of love that the average person experiences.
You talk about people as the soul as coming into the earth's environment as a sort of duality, a female and male.
Not always female and male, yeah.
But feminine and masculine.
Not always, no. The soul itself, the complete soul, when it's amalgamated, has a combination of feminine and masculine qualities.
I think you're right, but this is talking about an individual soul. There is masculine and feminine traits to the individual soul, but it's true that not all souls choose to want to display masculine traits because they actually like being feminine. I would describe it as basically every soul should be considered to be an it. You just have different degrees of masculine and femininity in you. But yeah, someone who's stubborn and, afraid of being attacked for saying or agreeing with things like this, they aren't going to agree with me, even though I'm God, even though this is the truth. I feel like it's brainwashing that has made people a certain way. But having said that, I do think that there is something in the DNA that makes males less similar to me. Males should take on a sort of helper role because that's kind of what I want. I want someone to help, but also provide some sort of order, security, do things that I can't do, basically. Which is a good thing because there's a lot of things that I don't really like. I don't like getting dirty. I don't like really building. I'm not really a physical person. I mean, I'm active and I like doing things, but my life is about sort of sitting back and watching and judging rather than actually getting actively involved. So I feel like this has helped influence the human DNA, making male hormones different to female hormones.
But the soul, when it splits, has three potential ways of splitting. One way of splitting is for one half to be male and the other half to be female. In other words, one half to be dominantly masculine in qualities and therefore attract a masculine body, and the other half to be dominantly feminine in qualities and therefore attract a feminine body.
Him talking about the soul splitting actually just reminds me of two things. So one, it reminds me of kind of this, imagine this was like a world consciousness soul. So not God's spirit, but just like a united spirit that's kind of linking with everyone on earth. Okay, you start off being animals and have a very low vibration, and then you kind of ascend upwards and have a better spiritual connection, which allows some sort of tapestry to get more complicated. And this is kind of what happens when you weave in and out of your conscious lives from your next conscious life. Another thing it reminds me of when he says the splitting of a soul, it reminds me of like the Holy Spirit versus the inverted spirit, which is evil and creepy, yes, but sometimes the spirit does things for the benefit of the person and sometimes it does it for the opposite benefit or just the opposite of what I want. But when it comes to that, there are some things that people can do that I want and some things that I don't want. So if this box does represent a world consciousness, sometimes people can go up and down, sometimes they're on my side, sometimes they're on the inverted side. It really depends on what they're saying.
Then the other alternative is that the soul has more femininity in it as a total.
As a personality.
And when it splits, one half splits with the fair dominance of femininity, so that goes into a female body, and the other half splits into with the dominance of feminine qualities into a female body.
No, I don't believe that. I think the female souls are actually people who are probably older or a bit wiser. Maybe they've just had the same amount of lives of other people, but they've lived more years within those lives, or maybe they've gone through certain experiences where they were sort of brainwashed into being a certain way or believing that they must be female, even if they were going to go on to become a male, but maybe they didn't live as long being a male. If you've had 5 lives being a female and 5 lives being a male, but in all your male lives you live for like 20-30 years, but in all your female lives you live for 60-70 years, you might find yourself being more feminine than masculine. Or maybe it's just choice, it can be choice. Although actually I think it's more likely to be the type of lives that you've lived. You know, if you've had some really good lives where you were female and had lots of good memories and lots of good experiences, maybe you were rich in those lives, whereas in all the male lives that you've had you were poor, and hence relate them to suffering, hence you don't really want to be male for that reason. I believe that Madonna was William the Conqueror in one of her past lives, and I feel like this was where she got her keenness to want to be a male, because she had a lot of wealth and a lot of, you know, power, and people respected her, and she wants to go back to that. Maybe it's like a deep thing that's embedded in her soul or her consciousness. There's some old souls that like being the male because they like being a sort of leader, dominant figure, and there's lots of, you know, younger souls that like being the younger souls and wanting to look cute. So there's good and bad in being feminine or masculine. So yeah, but it's definitely not to do with soul being split in half and, you know, half being female and half being male. That's got nothing to do with it.
The third alternative is that the soul is dominantly masculine, even though it does have some feminine qualities. And if that happens, then generally the soul will split into a dominant, one half will split into a dominantly masculine and therefore attract a dominantly masculine body, a male body, and the other half is dominantly masculine, so it will also attract a masculine body. So they are the three potential ways that the soul...
So Mary is your soulmate. So is her soul development exactly the same as yours?
No. Can I answer that? Yeah, I'd like to answer that.
That's an interesting response. Her asking, can I answer that? It's almost like she's asking for permission to answer something. That's definitely a very feminine trait, but things like that are caused by brainwashing and past life experiences of people brainwashing you to be a certain way just because you are a certain gender.
So for every soul, as it splits, so every soul splits at the time of incarnation, and ourselves, we reached a certain development in love, which meant that we could reincarnate, for want of a better term, and we split again.
Can I just explain that when we reached that unified condition, we did have exactly the same development in love, because that's the only way that you can unify, by having the same development in love.
I don't believe that. I think you just will be on Earth at the same time, and your sort of subconsciousness or spirit will kind of guide you to find each other if you want that. But yeah, this is why it's not a good idea to have your parents marry you into other families, because you're not going to make your own choices about who you want. This is why it's not a good idea to marry too young, or just marry the first person you start dating, you know, because there are other options out there. You need to explore your options for you to find the right person and feel like they are the one that you want to die and come back with, you know. That should be your ultimate goal, to find this. You want to call that soulmates, just like someone you're destined to be with because you've met them in a past life or loved them in a past life, you know. I think that's a good interpretation of it, but that's how I would interpret it. I think it's fairly dangerous to believe in soulmates. Why? Because if you are in an abusive relationship, if you are with someone who beats you up and hurts you, you know, if you believe that that person is your soulmate, you're going to want to stay with them even though the relationship is completely wrong, and you might become ignorant to the truth about how wrong the relationship is. Having said that, I feel like you promote the idea of a soulmate because maybe there's going to be some crazy people who think that they are my soulmate when they start realizing the power and the fact that I'm God. You know, they might, I'm thinking of the Borg guy that I was speaking to, you know, he was liking what I was saying, he was kind of interested in what I was saying, he was seeing all the power that I had, and then he started talking about how do I know that, you know, I'm not your soulmate. And I feel like a lot of stupid people would do this if they find someone that they like, or if they look up to them and see them as being powerful, or perhaps a Christ figure. They might start having beliefs that they are my soulmate, just like that Charles guy who was crazy in that film. But yeah, when you're in love with someone, you know, you can do some very silly things. So I will be needing security guards.
But then for any half of a soul, if you like, for yourself, equally myself at this time, and AJ at this time, we're all impacted upon by the environment in which we grow up.
It's almost like she's asking for permission to answer something. Things like that are caused by brainwashing and past life experiences of people brainwashing you to be a certain way just because you are a certain gender.
Our connection to God is also limited by those things, or encouraged, depending on the upbringing that we have. And so my soul development, which is the development of my soul, how I classify it is in terms of love, and for myself in terms of connection with God, because I have a strong passion for our soul. Each soul has its own personality. So our soul's personality has a strong desire for God, which is part of the reason why historically we're noted for that, or at least you are. So at incarnation or reincarnation, the personality remains intact of the soul. However, the life experience then begins to affect the soul condition. So for myself and AJ, we've grown up in completely different families, and had different experiences, had different levels of openness to God and emotion according to the family life that we were in this time. At this stage, AJ's soul development in love is greater than my own.
You being so humble as to say that does make me question that theory of yours.
Your question was...
And it's not because of anything that I have intrinsically that's different than Mary. It's only because we've had different opportunities. And I began the process of clearing away the errors of my soul quite a number of years before Mary began the process.
Yeah, I actually think your ability to love me is kind of the same, but hey, only a test would actually tell, you know. If I was to be sacrificed, well, I'm pretty sure it would be the guy that would be most likely to vote for things, because that's kind of the nature of a guy more tempted to. But yeah, I don't really want you to love me, so whatever.
Can you explain what automatic writing is and this channeling business that a lot of people don't quite understand or have any knowledge of?
Sure.
So channeling is really just as you and I are having a conversation, it's the ability to have a similar conversation with someone who's lost their physical body and is now in a spirit form. And so that can occur with anyone in the spirit world. We began to talk about the different levels that exist in the spirit world earlier. So anywhere from the first sphere or realm, which is a lower condition of love, then say that seventh or eighth sphere, which is the transition where we become at one with God, if you like, all the way into the celestial heavens, which are all the spheres beyond there. So the process of channeling is having a communication with spirits in one of those realms.
I don't believe in any of this. I can't channel messages from another person. All the messages that I get are from something that calls itself me and sounds like me and makes sarcasm and sarcastic jokes and messes up my words too. And it actually sounds like me. It actually talks like me and loves the crazy things that I love, so it's definitely not something else. I like though how you say that the 7th or 8th is where you kind of get into the higher realms, and then there's a couple of realms above that, you know. I would actually say the singers and celebrities are in the 10th realm because they're on their 10th life. So by your definition, you are saying that the singers and celebrities are in a way at one with me, and I guess in a way they kind of are. Like if I was living their life, if I had their opportunities, I would do the things that they would do. Even if it means hurting the sort of God, Christ, you know, I probably would, because I might not understand how awful her life is, or I might just be led by the Spirit through serotonin to do certain things.